Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Greetings and salutations and a warm welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about APIs. But to begin with, we will tell you what an API is. So if you're outside of the tech industry, don't worry, we will set the scene perfectly there. And then I also want to explore if the API revolution that is underpinning the digital transformation of everything at the moment, could that connection tissue that binds together cloud-native architecture, enables to enjoy digital services, create more problems? Well, while the API is fundamental for the way we work and live, there's an argument that they are also exposing organisations to a new domain of security risks. So today's conversation, we're going to dive into the benefits and the pitfalls of API so every business can be better prepared. That is our show today, and to bring that topic to life is Peter Klimek from Imperva, and he's going to be joining us to talk about all this and much more. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Seattle, where Peter is waiting to chat with us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name's Peter Klimek. I'm a director of technology at Imperva. And for those of you that don't know Imperva, we are a cybersecurity company that helps organizations protect their applications and data and APIs for the purpose of this conversation. My background has been in technology for quite some time. Really kind of started out working more on the kind of practitioner side, working in looking at technologies like IBM WebSphere and the big web services and things like that. And then over the course of my career, moved and made the transition into security and helping organizations basically help to protect their data.
And if I was to take you back even further than that, before those IBM days, can you remember where your passion for technology came from? What lit that spark in you and how those worlds of technology and cybersecurity collided? And ultimately, if we go down the Marvel route, what was your origin story?
Yeah, this is a kind of a fun question to go back and to think about. I'm a 90s kid. And so, I think really kind of came of age where the internet and AOL and all the different services were really coming online and people were using those. And so I begged and pleaded with my parents to have a computer. And then, of course, once I got that computer, I pretty much spent all of my time on it. So much to the chagrin of my dad, instead of going out and playing baseball and other sports, I was the type of kid who said, let me go and hang out in the basement and tinker with this computer. And so that's really kind of where I started in terms of, just getting my feet wet with computers as a whole and just really kind of jumped all into it. And then the thing that I think was always kind of interesting now looking back a little bit more retrospectively is during that era, that 90s era, I would say that we were in really the golden age of what I call the hacker movie. So these are movies, of course, like Hackers, of course, but then, Sneakers and The Matrix and all sorts of other ones that I think, especially as a teenager at that time, left quite an impression on me in terms of just getting in an interest into cybersecurity as a whole. And so I always kind of look back fondly at those movies now and still actually go back and watch them from time to time because ultimately I think they are probably one of the things that really actually pushed me in that direction.
Oh, man. And there was The Net with Sandra Bullock a few years later. There were so many of them around that time, wasn't there?
It truly was the golden age of hacker cinema.
And I'm curious, do you still miss the sound of a 56K modem connecting, or am I on my own on that one?
I forever have that burned into my memory. I was actually just going through and doing a remodel of my kitchen, and I found an old wired telephone line in there, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, well, I don't need this anymore. I think I can just rip this out. But it was a little bit wistful in doing that.
One thing that I was going to say as well on the 56K modem thing and all those movies, do you remember, I think it was CSI a few years later, and there was that infamous line, it's the GUI interface using Visual Basic to track the killer's IP address. All that tech babble that makes no sense. It kind of went to that quite quickly, didn't it?
it was very easy just to throw a lot of terms together and quickly confuse people. And you know what? I want to say that is something that has certainly not gone out of fashion for anyone that follows the cloud native computing world and everything else along those lines. I'm just continually amazed by how quickly things will go from I understand what you're talking about to I have no clue what you just said.
And of course, that path, watching those movies as well, that all led you to Imperva. So can you tell me a little bit more about Imperva and the kind of problems that you solve for businesses?
Sure. So Imperva is a pure play cybersecurity company. We've been around for almost 20 years now. And for most people, when they hear Imperva, the first thing they probably end up thinking about is a web application firewall. This is really kind of where our namesake product started out in years ago when the company was first founded. And the purpose of a web application firewall is really to protect web applications or APIs from malicious requests. And so it's basically a way of just filtering out the bad noise and letting through all of the good requests into your applications. Now, of course, over the years, we've expanded pretty significantly beyond that. So as application security and as the types of attack vectors became more prolific, Imperva expanded into other areas such as distributed denial of service mitigation, bot protection, as well as we have the other side of our business, which focuses entirely on data security. And so really helping organizations protect their crown jewels, which is always going to be their data and the data that's stored in large distributed databases.
And today we're going to be talking about APIs, and we are living in the age of API now, especially as people want to unify that data across hundreds of applications for many businesses. But just to get everyone on the same page, and for those outside of tech or IT, can you set the scene and tell the listeners a little bit more about exactly what an API is?
Sure. And I love to just kind of go back through the history of this because I think it's just so interesting how the evolution of it has changed. And if we kind of think about a lot of technology trends, they always kind of ebb and flow. And probably there's no better example than the client server architecture. And so what you can kind of think about this is really who is doing all the heavy lifting, whether it's the client or the server itself. And so if we go way back to, the 2010 or the 2000s, basically, we're in the age of basically having web browsers, which were able to render applications, but they didn't do a lot of heavy lifting. Most of that was done on the server side. And so you can kind of think about this instance of you had really dumb clients, but smart servers. And then right around maybe like 2008, 2009 or so, there was, of course, a big technology shift with the emergence of mobile phones. And that kind of changed the nature of things. We went from having these kind of dumb clients to now having smart clients, as well as still maintaining and having smart servers. And so for a lot of organizations, APIs really became kind of the mechanism or the tool that they used to shuffle data back and forth between these smart clients and smart servers on the back end. Now, of course, as we look at really kind of how the architectures themselves have changed over the years, APIs are not new. They've been around for a very, very, very long time. And even in the 2000s, we had something called SOA, or service-oriented architecture. And so I mentioned before that I worked with services like IBM WebSphere and kind of these big, heavy applications. And those were really heavily using this kind of SOA-based architecture. As we merged a little bit later on into the 2010s, this is where we started seeing the adoption of what's basically referred to as REST or RESTful APIs. And this was actually a standard that was defined way back in 2000, but it really didn't start reaching this large scale adoption until the 2010s, when people were looking for easy methods to be able to shuffle data back and forth between a mobile client and a server. And so that's really kind of what kicked everything off.
It seems that conversations in every industry about APIs are growing and making headline news. In particular, it seems there's a substantial amount of market activity around API security. Now, I know that's in your wheelhouse. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so really it follows the trend of just the proliferation or just the explosive growth of APIs. And so as I mentioned, we had mobile devices really coming online, and so a lot of new APIs were being spun up to service those clients. Simultaneously, of course, we had lots of new IoT devices coming online, and those all needed APIs to talk to. So this was kind of like one area of business where a lot of organizations started adopting external APIs. At the same time, we also saw a couple other major shifts in kind of the business landscape. So the first one was there's lots of new B2B business models. And probably the best example that I could give you here would be companies like Twilio, who basically made an entire business out of just creating APIs to service other developers and really kind of offering new services. And then similarly, we also had things like the DevOps movement. And more recently, then we had things like microservices and cloud native architectures. So these are kind of the four major pillars that I always look at as being what are the core drivers, what are the core business areas for why people are spinning up APIs. And then, of course, with that massive number of new APIs that are coming on, added a whole new host of security related issues. And so that's basically where we are today, of API security now being this hot topic that everyone's talking about.
Fantastic. And what do you think it is about APIs that's creating a security risk now?
The biggest thing is really that ultimately, while there's a lot of similarities to application security strategies and things that are well-honed strategies that organizations have built up over the years, they are different enough that it can make it a little bit more challenging for organizations to figure out how to actually secure them. And probably there's no better way to describe this than to think about APIs not really in the context of them being an application programming interface, but really thinking of them more as they are an interface to data. I always like to look at it not as something that a programmer is exposing to the web, but kind of thinking it more like how a SQL database can be used to be able to go and access and query information. And that's effectively what an API is doing. And so by exposing lots of mechanisms externally or internally for people to be able to go and query data, it now becomes a data security problem for a lot of organizations.
And I'm curious, as someone that's chatting with your customers on a regular basis, based on those conversations, how much of a challenge is API security right now?
It's a huge challenge right now.
Yeah.
I think there's really a couple of reasons for it too. Not just is it something that's newer that organizations are having to deal and contend with, but when you really start getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of APIs and looking at them and working with them, you have to have a really strong development background, or most people do. And so for security practitioners in particular, where they already have to be experts in network security and networks, and then they have to be experts in servers and applications and all these other things, it can be a really big challenge for the existing personnel to basically also have developer backgrounds to be able to understand what's going on. And so that's probably the biggest thing, is just there's a major skills gap when it comes to going and addressing API security issues that we didn't quite see as much in normal application security issues.
And for people that are listening all over the world, in particular business leaders, etc., what would your advice be to those people that need to build an API security strategy, or it's on their to-do list for 2022? What would your best advice be for them?
Yeah, the one piece of advice that I always give right away is it can't be done in a silo. And so for any organization that's looking to build out an API security strategy, I really strongly recommend building it out through more of an API center of excellence, where you take a cross-functional group of people, and not just the security team, but the developers themselves who really have a stake in this. And you work to develop what your internal standards are going to be for how you're planning on publishing APIs, how you're planning on discovering them, as well as how you're planning on being able to actually enforce certain things about those APIs. And so by taking kind of a more holistic strategy and through a more centralized governing body, you're able to get the right stakeholders at the table. Everyone gets buy-in into the process, and you're able to come up with the recommendations that you actually need to be able to implement a truly effective strategy.
So what's Imperva doing in the API market to help its customers? Is there anything you can share there about the active things that you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, one of the things I always want to do stress or emphasize right in the very beginning of any API security conversation is 70% of what you're already doing today to protect your applications still directly applies to APIs as well. So if you've already gone and explored a DDoS mitigation solution, that solution is going to be directly applicable to your APIs. Same thing for your web application firewalls, those will be directly applicable to your APIs. Once you're then looking to go for more API security specific capabilities, there's a few major areas where you want to focus in on, and this is where Imperva has focused in as well. The first and foremost is around discovery. So a big part of any security program is first, of course, discovering all of your assets and understanding what your actual attack landscape looks like. And so for APIs, there's really two aspects of this. First and foremost, you need to just know where your APIs are in particular. And then the second thing you need to know is what are all of the endpoints and data that API exposes. So basically taking a deeper dive and understanding what is the actual schema or structure of that API and what are the data classification types that it is. This helps you better prioritize and understand the risk of any sort of API endpoint, and you can quickly identify if you're accidentally leaking PII or personally identifiable information, or PHI, or health records, things like that. So that's really kind of the first area where we focus on, is helping organizations gain that level of discovery. And then the second area that we focus on is really then taking it to the next step and helping them actually lock down those APIs. And there's many different strategies that you can use for that, but I'll just go ahead and pause with that.
No, that's absolutely perfect. And I think there'll be so many people listening around the world that those words will really resonate with them, because I think there's a lot of companies think that what they do is unique and nobody else has that many APIs that they have, or the idea of securing them is a little bit different for them because what they do is completely separate to their competitors. But the reality is most businesses are the same, aren't they?
Absolutely. I think, we talk to a lot of development teams, we talk to a lot of organizations, and, every now and then we do hear of an organization that does something that is truly, truly unique. And sometimes if they're doing something that's really, truly unique, they did either one of two things. They're operating at massive, massive scale, and they really, really needed to do something unique, or they chose to do something unique because they just made a really bad choice.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and how you're helping businesses today. Today, we've covered just about everything, really. We began with your journey in tech and how it led to Imperva and the work you're doing with API security now. But I want to have a bit of fun with you before I let you go now and ask you,
Sure.
What has been the soundtrack to your career in tech? Is there a song, a story, or a song and piece of music that mean anything to you that we can... you can share with the listeners, and we'll add that song to our Spotify playlist today.
Oh yeah, I've got the perfect song for it, and the band itself. I think this kind of goes back to that earlier reference that we had to kind of the golden age of the hacker movie. I will also say that back in the 90s, we're also in the golden age of just excellent soundtracks as a whole, and so no better band in my mind encapsulates this than the band Underworld, and. Yes. The song in particular is actually one of their newer tracks from a few years ago from an album called, actually, I can't even remember the album name off the top of my head right now, but the song is Ova Nova. And it just has an excellent build. It's that type of song that just really, can put you in the zone from, thinking about programming or doing anything related to, security. And I just absolutely love it.
It's a great song. I know that well. I'm relieved you said that and not Born Slippery. And I'm going to start saying lager, lager, shouting, lager, lager.
Train Spotting forever immortalized that song without a doubt.
Absolutely. Well, I'll add that to our Spotify playlist. And before we move on to your contact details here, I've got to say one of the bizarrest gigs I've ever been to, and it was an accidental thing because I used to work in the event industry in the IT world. So sometimes I'd get into gigs and sometimes there'd be staff offers. And I was at the beginning in a packed out arena for 15,000 people of a certain age for a Barry Manilow gig. Okay, and I kid you not, it was 15,000 people holding glow sticks as he came out to Born Slippery Underworld. I've never seen anything like it in my life. But for anyone wanting to find out more information about Imperva, the work you're doing, especially around APIs, etc., where's the best starting point?
Just our website, imperva.com. We have a great thing on the website too that we refer to as our cyber threat index, which I kind of look at as almost like the inverse credit score of the internet. So if you're ever wondering just what does the state of the internet look like, go on to imperva.com, check out our cyber threat index. We have tons of information and reports on there about the state of the security landscape, whether it's DDoS or bots or API security, lots and lots of resources that are on there.
Well, I think the connective tissue that binds together cloud-native architecture that enables us all to enjoy digital services is an API. And I cannot thank you enough for today for coming in and diving in deep into the topic around the benefits and pitfalls of API. Not only that, but for sharing your story, where we've covered everything from hackers, 80s movies, AOL, and even Barry Manilow and Underworld. You can't get that in every 30-minute podcast, but thank you so much for bringing everything to life today and sharing your story.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be here.
It seems conversations about APIs are growing and making more headline news all the time. And in particular, it seems there's a substantial amount of market activity around API security. But it's a subject we don't always hear too much about. So I cannot thank Peter enough for taking the time to come on here and dive into this subject. And I think we did successfully cover the benefits and pitfalls of APIs and how businesses can be better prepared. But over to you. If any aspect of the conversation resonated with you today, if you've got any insights or alternate views on it, I welcome them all. Please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Keep those messages coming in, and I'll return again tomorrow. So a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.